So sine law. So kind of like the cosine law, between the two of these, it really depends on what information you've been given is dependent on which law you're going to use to solve for your missing side, angle, whatever you're trying to find. So I'll kind of talk about that at the end just a little bit so that you can kind of, look for guidance in terms of, oh, I've been given this information, so chances are I'm going to use sine law to figure it out. Okay, so in this case, your labeling, everything still stays the same as like what we talked about in the cosine law. With sine law, though, when you take this side relationship and the opposite angle to it, so sine of C and the side relationship of C, if I take the ratio of this to this, it's going to equal the ratio of this side to this angle measure. And it's also going to equal the ratio from A to this angle measure. So all three of these ratios will equal each other in sine law. So now the question is, I can ultimately have it where I put my side measure on top over my angle measure, or I can do it the other way and put my angle measure on top over my side measure. It honestly does not matter. All of the ratios, as long as you're consistent, if you're starting with side, you better start with side in the second ratio. All of them have to be the same in terms of what goes on top and what goes on the bottom. Typically, when you're using cosine or using sine law, you're going to use two of the ratios. You'll never use all three. So you're basically going to have enough information where you may plug in for, both B values over here, and you may have to find the angle measure, or you might have to find this particular side measure. So you'll never use all three. You're going to use the two that have enough information in them for you to actually solve. So in the first question, this one says that we need to determine the value of A, and that's a little a, so that's this A over here. And we're going to find it to the nearest tenth of a meter. So that's essentially looking at that and going, hey, that's 1 decimal place. So we know in the end, whatever answer we get, we have to have it to 1 decimal place. So in this case, I'm looking for A. That's what I'm trying to find. And if I'm going to make that ratio, it's going to be over the sine of A. And now I'm going to set that equal to, I got to find some more information that I have. Right now, as it stands, I've got this value down here, which is opposite to my capital B. I'm dealing with a B value there. My angle measure, it's not given there. But I hope recognizing that all the angles in a triangle add up to 180. And right now, as it stands, you've got 2 angle measures in this triangle. So it's pretty straightforward to be able to find that missing one, because you can simply take the 180 and subtract the other 2 off of it. So if I take 180, subtract the 53, and subtract the 46, you are going to get an angle measure of 81 degrees. So really, B up here is 81 degrees. So if I am looking over in creating my sine ratios, I've got A, I don't know what it is. Sine of A is simply going to be sine of 53 degrees. That's going to equal my B, which happens to be 36, and my sine of B, which we just figured out was 81, was my angle B. So I'm going to have to figure out what the sine of 81 is. Now, the other thing you got to remember, just like with your cosine law, make sure you're in DEG mode on your calculator. Make sure you're in that degree mode. So now essentially what we're doing is we're setting up ourselves, we can cross multiply, where we're taking A times the sine of 81 is equal to 36 times the sine of 53. So you can take your calculator and figure out sine of 81. And when you do these, put 4 decimal places as you're working through this. And I'm going to put the A at the end, because typically we always put our variable at the end. And then on the other side, I've got sine of 53. And I can times it while it's still in my calculator, times it by the 36. And that's going to give me 28.7509. I'm just keeping everything like with a few decimal places in there just so that it keeps my accuracy a little bit more. So here I'm going to divide by 0.9877. And I'm going to divide this side by 0.9877 because I'm trying to solve for A. So if I divide that by 0.9877, I am getting an answer of 29.010. So that's what it's going to come out on your calculator and a whole bunch of other answers or other numbers. But I need it to the 10th of a meter. So this is really going to be 29.1. And we are talking, that's interesting because it says meters and we are in centimeters. So let's just take it as centimeters for now instead of doing meters. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one basically with this one, we had to actually go and find an actual angle measure, which is fine. Sometimes it'll already be there. Sometimes you kind of have to, go through that process. So like, for example, in this next one, it's looking like you need to find B, which is here, which means in order to find B, you've got your angle measure opposite to it. And now you need to find another full-on set of a side, opposite, and an angle measure. And in this case, you've got this piece and you've got these. So you could set this up as, hey, I'm going to find B over sine of B. And then the other missing pieces that I've got is side A over sine of A. So this process one, you're still finding a side relationship just like we did in the last one. You'll work through that same process and kind of work to get your answer. So we won't work through that one because it's literally identical to the one above for process-wise, but we will work through this next one because this one you're trying to find an angle measure this time. So we want to work through that process to kind of give you an idea of what that's going to look like. So in this case, again, we need to find angle F. So this is the missing piece that we're trying to find. So if I am trying to find sine of F, that's my top part. Now what corresponds to that would be the little f for the corresponding side. So that's these two. Now I have to think about the other pieces of information I have is from D's. So I'm looking at sine of my D angle measure over my side D. So in this instance, if I look at this sine of F, I don't know, over my side of F, which is 28 centimeters. And then the other one, I've got sine of D, which is sine of 80 over 37 centimeters. So there's lots of ways to figure these out. Like I use the cross multiplying on the top question. We can look at this and go, well, I could figure out what the sine of 80 divided by 37 is, and I could go sine of 80, get an answer, and then divided it by 37. And I would find out that this whole side is 0.0266. So I could do that and still have sine of F is equal to 28. So I can work through this in a different process, right? So really that would mean that I'm going to take and multiply both sides by 28 to get rid of the 28 from underneath the sine of F, which would leave me with sine of F is equal to times 28, which is going to give me 0.7453. Now, I haven't got it down to an actual angle measure. I've just got it down to a bunch of decimals, and it's saying sine of F, okay? So kind of like our last from cosine law when we were solving for our angle measure there, really I'm dividing both sides by sine. And what that means is I'm really taking the sine to the power of -1 of this particular decimal. So that means that you've got a button, second function button right above your sine button, that if you take and find 0.7453 and take the second function of sine of that, you are going to get that angle measure is 48.18 something, something, something. Now, we want it to the nearest tenth of a degree. Again, that's a decimal, 1 decimal place. So in this case, this is going to be 48.2 degrees. How was that?
Good.
Are you waiting for the, where's the hard stuff? Because this is pretty easy. It's not meant to be difficult. Definitely not meant to be difficult because it's essentially, you've done this in Foundations 20.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, it was just, it's more of a refresher. Kind of get your head around it, make sure it still makes sense, right? The biggest thing when moving through this, and in this little chart kind of helps a little bit to kind of decide, oh, am I using sine law? Am I using cosine law? So depending, like in this situation, when you're giving a side, and an angle, so side, angle, you are dealing and you are asked to find an angle measure, you're going to use the sine law, because chances are the angle you're trying to find is that missing piece. So if you've got these two corresponding to each other, these two would be corresponding, and this would be your only missing piece of information. If you're given two angles and a side, so the situation of it could be angle, side angle, or it could be side angle, angle, and you're asked to find an additional side in that, you're going to use sine law. Now, all of these seem so tedious to try and go, oh, I don't know. Ultimately, when it's all said and done, you literally have two options. You've got sine law and cosine law. And so you know it's going to work if when you put the information in, whatever you've been given, and you only have one missing variable or one missing piece that you have to find, then you're good. The problem is if you use one of those laws and you have multiple pieces missing out of it, then you can't use that, right? So it's a matter of trying to find, you'll know you get the right one when you have everything filled in except for one variable. So the other, for cosine law, if you've got the situation where you've got side, angle, side, where the angle is contained between the two sides and you're asked to find the other missing side, you're going to use cosine law. Or the scenario where you have all three sides and you're asked to find an angle, you're going to use cosine law. So you kind of have all these kind of options or potential scenarios that come up. It's not a matter of having to memorize these, but it just helps in terms of guidance until you get used to playing around with them to see which one you use and which one you don't. And that's it. That's all there is to sine law. So I don't want to spend a whole ton of time on it because it's something that you've seen before, right? So it's more just to kind of refresh the memory. How does that feel?
It feels good.
Now I'm going to say, hey, go do some questions for practice. Which, do a few. I don't expect you to do all of it. I just make sure you're working a little bit on it to try it and